And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Somebody asked me how I knew if it was the most haunted city in the country. For 20 years, I did ghost tours here every Saturday night. And we got into the tunnels underneath the city and everything else you can imagine. This is definitely the most haunted city in the country. It's also April the 1st, the 91st day of this new year. Just 274 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Well, it's also Fun Day, Boomer Bonus Day, National Trombone Players Day, International Tatting Day, and National 1 Cent Day, even though the 1 cent coin is not made anymore. If you find some of those, I'm told that they're worth quite a bit of money. Well, let's see what stories we have in the news today, because there's always something going on. President Trump's going to address the nation with an important update on Iran. We'll see what news he has to impart. And there's a Supreme Court showdown on birthright citizenship. That decision could reshape America. Supreme Court's going to hear arguments today in a case involving President Trump's executive order on a birthright citizenship. The case turns on one critical phrase in the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Court's interpretation of subject to the jurisdiction thereof will have major consequences for immigration enforcement, national security, and the meaning of American citizenship. We'll see what comes of that. Unfortunately, we have some extremely liberal justices. For Kristi Noem, and President Trump responded to a shocking cross-dressing photo tied to her husband. President Trump reacted yesterday after newly released photos appeared to show the husband of former Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem cross-dressing in private messages to a number of women. Images were allegedly part of a trove of hundreds of messages sent between Noem's husband, Brian, and 3 women. Those pictures were obtained by the Daily Mail. Father of 3 appeared to be pictured in hot pink underwear and wearing a skin-covered shirt with large faux breast worn underneath. New York Post reported the photos were taken while acting out a bimbofication fetish, which focuses on hypersexual, exaggerated physical appearances. Apparently it takes all kinds to make a world, and they keep popping up. Well, contributor for far-left outlet calls for wiping out Israel, says Israelis mustn't feel safe. A contributing writer for the far-left publication Drop Site News called for wiping out Israel and urged his followers not to make Israelis feel safe. I don't know how these Looney Tunes managed to get such prominent coverage, as it were. Palestinian journalist Abu Bakr Abed, the self-described accidental war correspondent whose work is published by Drop Site, took to social media Monday with a post calling for the complete elimination of the Jewish state. He said, wiping out Israel is not enough revenge. Israelis mustn't feel safe anymore. Hunt them and go after them where they go. These terrorist parasites have to be removed from our planet, he said in an Instagram post. Well, I would point out Israelis were an aggressor only in self-defense. We'll see what comes of all that. Well, aggressive brain cancer may respond to high-dose vitamin therapy, according to a new study. High-dose vitamin B3, or niacin, may enhance immune activity and improve short-term disease control and glioblastoma when added to standard therapy. That's according to early preclinical studies. It's a highly aggressive, fast-growing brain cancer. that develops from cells in the brain and spinal cord. In previous laboratory experiments in mice, niacin is shown to extend survival. Researchers at the University of Calgary aim to determine whether that same benefit extended to humans. Trials included 24 patients, which has the glioblastoma has a median survival of roughly 12 to 18 months. 6 months after receiving niacin, in addition to standard treatments, surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, 82% of the patients showed no disease progression, compared to the typical 54%, according to the study's press release. So maybe they found something. We'll see. Well, Costco's $140 10-pound Easter bunny has shoppers questioning price and instructions to smash it apart. A chocolate Easter bunny for $140, had better have something inside it. Members have been buzzing about the wholesale giant's chocolate Easter bunny. It's a seasonal sweet priced at $112.97 online and up to $140 in some stores, depending on location. Comes with instructions to smash it apart using a hammer, a mallet, or a rolling pin. This 10-pound giant bunny is being sold as an oversized Easter centerpiece and a shareable dessert. Semi-solid bunnies made with milk chocolate, white chocolate, and dark chocolate, according to the packaging. Contains 151 servings. Box also details how to actually eat it, as if we need instructions on how to eat a chocolate Easter bunny. Well, Kagan turns on liberal ally Jackson with a footnote jab over free speech. Both are Supreme Court justices. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson drew fire from an unlikely colleague on Tuesday with her lone dissent in the Supreme Court's 8-1 decision finding Colorado's ban on so-called conversion therapy for minors violated free speech rights. Fellow liberal Justice Elena Kagan criticized Jackson for failing to acknowledge case law that governs when speech can be regulated in the medical field, marking a rare public break between the two justices, typically aligned in cases centered on high-profile cultural issues. Justice Jackson's dissenting opinion claims that this is a small or even non-existent category, Kagan wrote in a footnote of a concurring opinion, which Justice Sonia Sotomayor joined. But even her own opinion, when listing laws supposedly put at risk today, offers quite a few examples. We've got issues out the wazoo, but we're going to argue about free speech over conversion therapy. Well, Tiger Woods is stepping away from the golf to seek treatment after his DUI arrest. He says, I know and understand the seriousness of the situation I find myself in today. He said in a statement he posted on social media, I'm stepping away for a period of time to seek treatment and focus on my health. It's necessary in order for me to prioritize my well-being and work toward lasting recovery. He says, I'm committed to taking the time needed to return to a healthier, stronger, more focused place, both personally and professionally. I appreciate your understanding and support and ask for privacy from my family, loved ones, and myself at this point in time. Well, he flips a car and wants privacy. Okay. Well, Jason Kelsey called out the Lions for BS contract demand to a retired Pro Bowl center. Detroit Lions forced retired Pro Bowl center Frank Ragnow to pay back some of his signing bonus, and Philadelphia Eagles great Jason Kelsey's not happy about that. The Lions have done this before with some of the best players in their franchise history, Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, and it's created a rift in their relationship with the two Pro Bowl Hall of Famers. Kelsey says he thinks it's BS that the Lions are asking Ragnow to return any money. He says, while I get that the team has a right to ask for the money back in the spirit of the agreement, I think it's BS. Frank's being asked to return money. Well, as much as they get, it's not out of the question. Well, Kid Rock's Nashville Mansion flyover incident ends as Hegseth clears the aircrew and lifts a suspension. War Secretary Pete Hegseth lifted a suspension issued against a flight crew involved in a helicopter flyover at Kid Rock's Nashville Mansion over the weekend. Hegseth posted on X Tuesday afternoon, "Thank you, Kid Rock. U.S. Army pilot suspension lifted. No punishment, no investigation. Carry on, Patriots." Fox News Digital confirmed early Tuesday the U.S. Army aircrew was suspended from flight duties pending an investigation into Saturday's helicopter stunt. On Saturday, the cowboy singer pumped his fist in the air as two AH-64 Apache helicopters idled outside his home in Tennessee, aptly dubbed the Southern White House. After the stunt, a spokesperson for Fort Campbell confirmed an investigation was launched to review the circumstances surrounding this activity. Well, if you've never been up close and personal with an Apache helicopter, it's definitely something to see. I've flown on many of them. Well, a Wisconsin high school teacher has been charged with sexual assault of students. She allegedly gave minors wine. 22-year-old high school special education teacher is facing decades behind bars after authorities say she engaged in sexual relationships with students and provided them with alcohol at her apartment. Nadia Horn, who co-taught world studies at Eau Claire North High School, made her initial appearance in Eau Claire County Court on Monday on felony child sexual assault charges. According to a criminal complaint obtained by WEAU-TV, the investigation began March 25th when the Eau Claire Area School District flagged a potentially inappropriate relationship to a school resource officer. The subsequent probe revealed a pattern of grooming and exploitation involving multiple 16-year-old victims. Detectives said Horn targeted at least two students she claimed needed support. One victim told police that the Horn purchased a cell phone for him to facilitate Snapchatting, where she allegedly sent really revealing photos. Well, I have to say, when I was 16 years old, if a teacher had done that, I'm not really sure how I would have reacted. The tallest college basketball player ever, 7 feet 9 inches tall, entering the transfer portal. Well, the average height of a men's basketball program is going to increase significantly next season. That's because Oliver Rue, the tallest basketball player ever, is transferring right to University of Florida. 7 foot 9 inch, 20-year-old announced his decision in an Instagram post where he thanked his coaches for believing in me, for trusting me, and pushing me to develop every single day, as well as trainers and managers and support staff. Said he took time to reflect on his jersey and what's best for his future. It's truly hard to put into words what these last 2 years this experience has meant for me. From being raised in the province of Quebec back home in Canada to representing this incredible program, wearing these colors and competing at the highest level has been one of the greatest honors of my life, he said. Well, 7 foot 9, it's going to be hard-pressed to find somebody who can compete with him. Well, the bike mob's Bay Bridge Blitz has been foiled as the police stopped rogue riders storming city streets before freeway chaos. Massive takeover targeting the Bay Bridge was shut down before it could start, as California law enforcement blocked a surge of bicycle riders attempting to storm one of the state's busiest commuter routes. California Highway Patrol's San Francisco area office, working with the San Francisco Police Department, identified the group as it rode recklessly through city streets and moved quickly to stop the attempt before it reached the bridge on March 28th. Authorities tracked the riders in real time as they made their way toward the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, eventually entering via the Hanson Street off-ramp, riding the wrong way into oncoming traffic. That's where the officers already positioned themselves. CHIP and SFPD officers blocked the group, stopping the takeover before it reached the freeway. Video released by CHP shows a police helicopter overhead as officers moved in and blocked access to the bridge. Officials said the response was deliberate and based on prior incidents where similar groups have progressed from city streets onto the bridge. Well, with all the things that folks have that they can do to try to storm something like the Oakland Bay Bridge, on bicycles no less, is the height of lunacy. Well, the ex-Vikings captain is sick. Minnesota's in a legal conflict with Trump administration over males and girls sports. Former Minnesota Vikings captain and University of Minnesota football player Jack Brewer had to watch his family state get sued by the U.S. Department of Justice for refusing to keep males out of girls' sports. DOJ announced it is suing education agencies in Minnesota on Monday for its continued refusal to comply with President Trump's mandate to keep biological trans males out of girls' high school sports in the state. DOJ alleged that the state's Department of Education and the Minnesota State High School League are in violation of Title IX. Brewer had been a staunch and frequent critic of the state's Democratic leadership, says he's sick about the whole thing. Well, it seemed to me that if you really want to play in high school sports, play in the one that's identified with whatever your gender is. We've had several instances where biological males have actually seriously injured biological females in sports. We don't need that. Well, Jimmy Gracie's chain necklace never recovered after Spanish police ruled his death an accident. Spanish authorities confirmed on Fox News on Tuesday that Jimmy Gracie's signature gold chain and rhinestone cross have not been found as part of the investigation of the 20-year-old's death. Charles Valle is a spokesperson for the Mossos de Escuadra, the regional Catalan police, confirmed that the necklace has not been found. Only a day after the 20-year-old University of Alabama junior's body was found in the water near Port Olympic Marine in the Mediterranean Sea, just a few hundred feet from where he and his friends had been partying at the famed Shoko nightclub. Police concluded his death was accidental. But if the necklace is missing, that would tend to raise questions about perhaps robbery. During a 2-day search from March 17 to March 19, police located his phone in the possession of a person who was wanted in connection with a separate crime. His wallet containing money, credit cards, and identification was found floating in the water. Where the results of an autopsy and toxicology report have not been released as of yet. The Jason Pack, a former FBI analyst, said the story of the evidence gathered in the case has to be filtered through the lens of the grieving Gracie family. But if that clearly expensive necklace is missing, that does raise interesting questions. Well, the Augusta National Chairman has revealed Tiger Woods' Masters status after his DUI arrest. He will not be at the Masters next weekend after he was charged with DUI after a rollover crash last weekend. That's according to Augusta National Chairman Fred Ridley. He has pleaded not guilty to charges stemming from the crash and his subsequent arrest. Ridley released a statement later revealing Woods will not be in Georgia for the event. The Augusta National Golf Club and the Masters Tournament fully support Tiger Woods as he focuses on his well-being. And although he won't be joining us in person next weekend, his presence will be felt here in Augusta. And let's see what else we got. Well, a Michigan Democrat has quit politics, saying the party's agenda has betrayed her faith. Michigan State Representative Karen Whitsett stepping away from political office, saying her Christian faith no longer aligns with today's Democratic Party after years of clashes over abortion and transgender issues in party leadership. She represents parts of North and Northwest Detroit in the 4th House District. Announced in March she wouldn't be seeking re-election or run for office again, calling the choice to walk away a spiritual decision. In an interview with Fox News, she said she can no longer support the Democratic Party. Over the past 4 years, she found herself increasingly at odds with party leaders for pushing policies she felt were incompatible with her beliefs. She says, I don't understand how Christian and Bible go together with Democratic Party. What I've seen over these last 4 years is nothing that I've ever seen before and nothing that I ever thought would happen before. Well, I think, in my humble opinion, She's just making entirely too much out of it. Do I agree with the Democratic Party? No, not at all. But making a religious issue out of it is going beyond the pale, so to speak. Well, a Wisconsin mother stabbed her teen daughter to death in order to protect her from Elon Musk. Wisconsin mother on drugs allegedly stabbed her 14-year-old daughter to death and told police she ended the child's life to protect her from billionaire tech executive Elon Musk. Taisi Aninsky of the town of Turtle in Rock County contacted authorities on March 20th and confessed to killing her daughter, Curran Ryan, the night before and then attempted suicide, according to a criminal complaint. During the call, which lasted about 13 minutes, Aninsky said she killed the girl to protect her from somebody else, later saying she wanted to protect her daughter from Musk, according to the complaint. I would not think Musk could even pick her out of a crowd, much less be threatening the girl's safety. Well, unearthed videos have exposed how Trump-endorsed candidate has championed DEI university hiring process. Representative Julia Letlow, a Republican of Louisiana, a Trump-endorsed Senate candidate in Louisiana, is saying that she will ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion policies will be rooted out of schools in her state if she wins. But her past remarks and actions as a university faculty member, such as promises to open a DEI office if hired as university president, and her past praise for DEI nationwide have thrown these promises into question. In a 2020 video from Lethlow's hiring process, when interviewing to be president of the University of Louisiana at Monroe, she called the school's record on faculty gender diversity shameful, praised DEI efforts around the country, and said she wanted to open the school's first DEI division, and suggested that if hired, she would want a person around the table that's cognizant and fighting for diversity, equity, and inclusion before any decisions made for the university. Well, it would seem to me you'd want the best qualified, not somebody based on what color or gender they are. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe DEI is more important than knowing what you're doing. I've seen that in a number of situations. Well, allergy season is here. You can get up to 56% off certain air purifiers from Dyson and Shark and a number of others. But spring means allergy season is back. Right air purifier can remove dust and pollen and pet dander. And right now, top-rated models from Dyson and Shark and others are up to 55 to 45% off on Amazon ahead of the big spring sale. They have options for literally every room size. Where Forrest Gump star Gary Sinise warns a lot of Americans are disconnected from military service. He's warned that many Americans are disconnected from military service because they don't know anybody who served, leaving them removed from the sacrifices troops make on their behalf. The Forrest Gump actor talked to Fox News' Benjamin Hall, saying the lack of personal connection has created a gap between civilians and those who fight for their freedom. And I will say that over the years, I've been a little surprised that more and more people I see have absolutely no idea what's involved in military service. And after dealing with the military and the VA for over 50 years, it's certainly surprising. Well, yesterday we talked about the death of Superman, an iconic figure in the Marvel Universe and DC Universe and all these other universes. Well, among the books that we've done, I set out to do a book about the death of President John F. Kennedy. And I came across something that was absolutely shocking. In addition to the death of the president, very few people seem to understand how many mysterious deaths actually surround the assassination. History often presents itself as a series of isolated moments, events that appear self-contained, neatly bounded by dates and official conclusions. But some events refuse to stay isolated. They echo forward in time, creating disturbances that don't settle, questions that don't close, and consequences that resist explanation. Well, one such event is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I remember it well. It was November 22nd, 1963, Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Sitting president was murdered in full public view. Within hours, shock gave way to fear, and within days, fear gave way to urgency. Within weeks, urgency gave way to closure, at least officially. American public was told the crime had been solved. A lone gunman, acting alone, driven by personal grievance and political extremism, had ended the life of the President of the United States. The nation was assured the case was closed. Nothing more to see here. Move along. But history has a way of leaving fingerprints where it doesn't want to be touched. Almost immediately, cracks appeared in the official account. Witnesses, a lot with military backgrounds, which would give them the wherewithal to know, described shots from directions that didn't align with the lone gunman theory. Medical personnel reported wounds inconsistent with the publicly described trajectory. Law enforcement officers gave statements that conflicted with one another. Journalists uncovered leads that raised uncomfortable questions. Investigators, both official and independent, found evidence that didn't fit cleanly into the explanation being offered. And then something else began to happen. The powers that be did their best to cover it up, but they couldn't. People started to die. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic wave, but steadily, persistently, and in patterns that are easy to ignore if you were determined not to look too closely. Witnesses who contradicted the official story died in accidents. Investigators died suddenly before publishing their findings. Journalists died under circumstances that defied easy explanation. Individuals who claimed foreknowledge of the assassination met violent ends. Yes, there were a number of people who said, in fact, tried to warn others that there was going to be an assassination attempt. Others, scheduled to testify or retestify, died shortly before doing so. And each death, considered in isolation, could be explained away. A car accident here, a heart attack there, a suicide ruled without thorough investigation. An illness that arrived with improbable speed. Coincidence is a powerful shield. Doesn't require conspiracy, any coordination, no intent, just repetition without scrutiny. And for years, coincidence was enough. But quite frankly, coincidence does have limits. When an unusually high number of people connected to a single historical event die prematurely, especially when these people share a common trait such as possessing inconvenient knowledge, the explanation of randomness begins to fail. Probability doesn't collapse under a single anomaly. It collapses under accumulation. Now, we're going to talk about that accumulation in this book. It's called Dead Witnesses by Ken Hudnall and Sharon Hudnall. It doesn't begin with an assumption of guilt. It doesn't advance a single monolithic conspiracy theory. Instead, it documents a phenomena, the systematic disappearance through death, intimidation, or silence of individuals connected to the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, some of these people are eyewitnesses standing in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. Others are police officers, federal agents, intelligence assets. Some are journalists who refuse to let the story go. Others are medical professionals, investigators, or peripheral figures. The only mistake was being too close to the truth at the wrong time. What unites them is not ideology, politics, or profession. What unites them is that they became inconvenient. Official investigations focused narrowly on how Kennedy was killed. Far less attention was paid to what happened afterwards, particularly to the people who challenged, complicated, or threatened the narrative that emerged so quickly. The Warren Commission cataloged the evidence, didn't examine the fate of the witnesses who provided it. Later inquiries revisited ballistics and timelines, but largely ignored the growing body count surrounding the case. Now, that omission was not trivial. It was actually central. In criminal investigations, witness intimidation is recognized as a hallmark of organized wrongdoing. When witnesses disappear, investigators ask why. When witnesses die, investigators look for patterns. When witnesses die in clusters, investigators assume intent until proven otherwise. But in the case of the Kennedy assassination, this basic investigative logic was rarely applied. Instead, the deaths were scattered across footnotes and dismissed in passing or ignored altogether. So we set out to gather them in one place. And here the witnesses are named, their roles are identified, the circumstances of their death are documented, and their connections to Dealey Plaza, to Lee Harvey Oswald, to Jack Ruby, to law enforcement, to intelligence operations are examined carefully and without exaggeration. Now, some readers and listeners are going to find the conclusions unsettling. Others are going to find them overdue. Our purpose is not to replace one official story with another. It's to restore visibility to people who are quietly erased from history and to ask a question that has lingered unanswered for more than 60 years. Why did so many people connected to the assassination of President Kennedy not live long enough to tell the full stories? The pattern was there. The pattern was visible. But for a very long time, it was a pattern nobody wanted to see. Well, mid-morning on November 22nd, 1963, Dallas was already a tense city. Tense as in on edge. President John F. Kennedy was scheduled to arrive shortly before noon. The city had spent days preparing for a visit that local officials hoped would showcase unity in a politically divided state. Texas had been a hostile ground for Kennedy before. Adlai Stevenson had been physically assaulted in Dallas only weeks earlier, and handbills accusing Kennedy of treason and were circulated openly. Federal authorities were aware of the hostility, but the motorcade route remained unchanged. And to my amazement, the motorcade route was announced. At about 11:37 in the morning, Air Force One touched down at Love Field. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy disembarked to cheering crowds. And that atmosphere, at least on the surface, appeared celebratory. Few in attendance could have imagined that within an hour, the most consequential crime of the 20th century would unfold in full public view. And that many of those who witnessed it would not live long after that. But the presidential motorcade left Love Field at 11:50 a.m., winding its way through downtown Dallas toward the Trade Mart, where Kennedy was scheduled to deliver a luncheon address. The route was printed in newspapers, announced on radio, and known well in advance. Security was conspicuously light by modern standards. No sealed rooftops, no counter-sniper teams, no meaningful crowd control beyond local police on motorcycles. Shortly after 11:30 p.m., the motorcade turned onto Elm Street and entered Dealey Plaza. Now, Dealey Plaza is deceptively small, if you've ever been there. From TV, it looks like a huge place, but it's not. What appears expansive in photographs is in reality a confined space bordered by a railroad overpass, a concrete pergola, sloping grass, and a 6-story Texas school book depository. The slow downward curve of Elm Street forced the presidential limousine to reduce speed dramatically. Witnesses later estimated the car was traveling no more than 11 miles an hour. It was that moment when the vehicle was at its most vulnerable that the shooting began. Now, accounts still differ to this day on the exact number of shots that were fired. Some witnesses heard 2, others heard 3, others heard 4 or more. Several reported shots coming from different locations, in different directions. A sharp crack echoed through the plaza, followed by a pause and another blast. People froze, uncertain whether they were hearing firecrackers or gunfire. Within seconds, chaos erupted. President Kennedy had been hit. Governor John Connally, seated in front of him, was also hit. Blood, bone fragments, and panic filled the open limousine. Jacqueline Kennedy climbed onto the rear of the vehicle, reaching for something witnesses later struggled to describe. Secret Service agent Clint Hill ran toward the car and jumped on its back as it accelerated out of the plaza. The shooting was over in less than 10 seconds. What followed was confusion on a scale rarely seen in a public crime. Police officers ran in multiple directions. Some rushed toward the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Others sprinted up the grassy knoll where many bystanders insisted shots had originated. Several witnesses reported seeing smoke near the wooden fence on top of the knoll. At least one railroad employee observed suspicious activity behind the fence moments before the assassination took place. Within minutes, the president was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Almost immediately, the machinery of official explanation began to move. Early afternoon, law enforcement attention narrowed rapidly onto a single suspect. Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine employed at the Texas Schoolbook Depository. He was arrested not at the scene of the crime, but in a movie theater after the shooting death of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, an event that itself would raise troubling questions about timing and location and identity. And before midnight, Oswald was publicly labeled the assassin, the one and only assassin. Before 48 hours had passed, Oswald himself was dead. November 24, 1963, in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, nightclub owner Jack Ruby stepped forward from a crowd of reporters and police officers and shot Oswald point blank on live TV. The accused assassin never stood trial. No cross-examination occurred. No jury was seated. No defense was mounted. With Oswald's silence, the official story hardened quickly. He was a lone nut gunman, acting alone, motivated by personal ideology. He fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. But the witnesses were still alive, and many of them didn't accept that explanation. In the days and weeks after the assassination, dozens of individuals, civilians, law enforcement officers, journalists, medical personnel, and intelligence-linked figures, gave statements that contradicted the emerging narrative. Some described shots from the front. Others reported additional gunmen. Several raised questions about the autopsy, the handling of evidence, and the conduct of authorities. And what happened next is the topic we're going to talk about. Over the months and years that followed November 22nd, 1963, an extraordinary number of people connected directly or indirectly with the assassination died under unusual circumstances. Some were killed violently. Others died in apparent suicides. Others died in accidents. Those that had died of apparent suicides were reported fear and pressure and prior threats. Still others succumbed to sudden illnesses at improbably young ages. Individually, each death could be explained away. Collectively, they formed a pattern that defies statistical expectation. Journalists who pursued leads aggressively died before publishing their findings. Witnesses scheduled to testify passed away shortly before they did so. Individuals who recanted earlier statements or claimed foreknowledge met abrupt ends. Even those tasked with investigating the crime, police officers, intelligence operatives, and informants, were not immune. We don't claim that every death was a result of murder. It doesn't require such an assertion to examine the patterns. The argument presented here is more restrained and more troubling. When a single event produces an unusually high concentration of premature deaths among witnesses, investigators, and peripheral participants, the burden of explanation shifts. Coincidence becomes less persuasive as repetition accumulates. Randomness fails when patterns emerge. The assassination of President Kennedy was not merely a murder. It was actually a rupture in American history. And the deaths that followed it, silent, scattered, and often forgotten, are part of that rupture. Dealey Plaza was the beginning, but the story didn't end there, not by any means. As we put this book together, the individuals cataloged in Appendix A we'll talk about before this show is over, examine not as abstractions, but as people. People who saw something, who knew something, or threatened simply by existing to complicate a story that powerful interests were eager to close. There were witnesses, and far too many of them died. And when the shooting began in Dealey Plaza, the first people to encounter the truth of what was happening were not investigators or analysts or government officials. They were ordinary citizens standing along a parade route. Police officers directing traffic, railroad employees on duty, and spectators who had come to see the president pass by. They were eyewitnesses. In any criminal investigation, eyewitness testimony forms the foundation on which all the conclusions rest. While eyewitness accounts are imperfect and subject to human error, patterns across multiple independent witnesses are treated as critical indicators, especially when those patterns contradict an official explanation. In Dealey Plaza on November 22, 1963, those patterns emerged almost immediately. Many witnesses reported hearing shots from the front of the motorcade rather than from behind. Others described seeing movement, smoke, or suspicious activity near the wooden fence on the grassy knoll. Several recalled the sound of gunfire echoing in ways inconsistent with a single rifle fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. And these accounts are not isolated by any means. They came from people standing in different locations, different vantage points, which didn't know one another and had no reason to coordinate their statements. And what happened to those witnesses afterwards is one of the most troubling aspects of the assassination. One of the most significant vantage points overlooking Dealey Plaza was the railroad tower west of the Texas School Book Depository. From this elevated position, a railroad employee had a clear view of the grassy knoll, the pergola, and the area behind the wooden fence. The witness in question was a man by the name of Lee Bowers. He stated that moments before the assassination, he saw two men standing behind the fence on the knoll. He described unusual activity in that area, including a flash or disturbance consistent with gunfire. His testimony directly challenged the notion that all shots came from the rear. And they had to in order for it to have been Lee Harvey Oswald. Bowers cooperated with investigators and repeated his account consistently. He never claimed certainty about the identity of the individuals he saw, but he was firm about what he'd seen. In 1966, 3 years after the assassination, he died in a single-car automobile accident. That crash occurred on a rural Texas road under circumstances that raised questions among those familiar with the case. He reportedly suffered injuries inconsistent with a typical collision, and witnesses noted anomalies at the scene. Officially, though, his death was ruled an accident. Unofficially, it removed one of the clearest eyewitnesses to activity on the grassy knoll. Also standing near the knoll at the time of the shooting was a lady named Jean Hill, sometimes referred to in the press as the Lady in Red. That was due to her clothing that day. She stated repeatedly she heard a shot coming from the front of the motorcade and that the sound was unmistakable. Her account contradicted the official conclusion almost immediately. She later described being pressured by authorities to alter her statement. She reported intimidation, surveillance, and harassment that lasted for years. Though she lived into old age, her health deteriorated under the strain of public scrutiny and private fear. Her experience illustrates a recurring theme. Not all witnesses were silenced by death. Some were silenced by pressure. Others weren't so fortunate. Another key witness was Mary Mormon, who stood only feet from the presidential limousine and took a Polaroid photograph at the moment of the fatal headshot. The image she captured became one of the most analyzed photographs in American history. Her photograph appeared to show an anomalous shape behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll. That's an area many eyewitnesses associated with gunfire. Her camera and photograph were seized by authorities almost immediately and held for extended periods. And though she cooperated fully, she later described ongoing harassment and pressure. Her testimony and photograph were repeatedly minimized or dismissed by authorities. She lived for decades after the assassination, but her role as a witness was effectively neutralized through official neglect rather than overt elimination. One of the most disturbing eyewitness accounts came from Gordon Arnold, who claimed to be standing on the grassy knoll with a movie camera at the time of the shooting. He stated that immediately after the shots were fired, he was confronted by a man who identified himself as a federal agent. According to Arnold, his camera and film were immediately confiscated. The film was never returned. He later maintained that he heard shots from the knoll and his film would have captured critical evidence. He lived in obscurity and fear for years, reluctant to speak publicly. His testimony, had it been preserved on film, would have been invaluable. Instead, it vanished. Among the most overlooked eyewitnesses was a man named Ed Hoffman, who stood near the triple underpass at the time of the assassination. Now, Hoffman was deaf, relied on visual observation rather than sound. He later described seeing suspicious activity behind the fence and individuals fleeing the area immediately after the shooting. Well, because he couldn't hear the shots, his testimony avoided many of the ambiguities associated with the sound perception. But his account was largely ignored by official investigators. He was never called to testify before the Warren Commission. He died in 2001, his observations still absent from the official record. These individuals don't share political views, occupations, or social circles. What they shared was proximity to the event itself and the information that complicated the official narrative. Some eyewitnesses died under questionable circumstances, others lived but were marginalized, intimidated, or ignored. Still others lost evidence that might have clarified what happened in Dealey Plaza. Together, their experiences reveal an early pattern. Witnesses whose accounts suggested multiple shooters or alternative firing locations faced consequences that witnesses supporting the official version did not. This pattern didn't end with civilian bystanders. We're going to talk about how the focus shifted to law enforcement officers, first responders, and government personnel. Men whose professional duty required them to tell the truth, and who in many cases paid a heavy price for doing so. Dealey Plaza produced witnesses. What followed determined which of them would be remembered and which would be erased. On any homicide investigation, law enforcement officers occupy a unique position. They're not casual observers or distant analysts. They arrive early, secure scenes, collect evidence, interview witnesses, make decisions that shape the official record. Their credibility is presumed, their statements carry weight, and their professional obligation is clear. Tell the truth as accurately as possible. In the assassination of President Kennedy, law enforcement officers were everywhere, directing traffic, responding to gunfire, pursuing suspects, and managing the chaotic aftermath. Many of them saw or heard things that didn't fit the lone gunman narrative that would soon dominate official explanations. What happened to a number of those officers afterwards raises profound questions. Now, at about 1:15 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, less than 45 minutes after the assassination, Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas. According to the official story, Tippit encountered Lee Harvey Oswald, attempted to question him, and was murdered in cold blood. Oswald was subsequently arrested and charged with Tippit's killing. But from the beginning, the Tippit case was riddled with inconsistencies. Witness descriptions of the shooter conflicted. Shell casing evidence was contradictory. Timeline reconstruction strained credibility. Several witnesses later expressed uncertainty about Oswald's identification, and another number of others recounted or modified their statements under pressure. What remains undeniable is one thing. Tippit's death served a critical narrative function. It transformed Oswald from a suspect into a cop killer, eliminating sympathy and accelerating the demand for swift resolution. Now, Tippit never testified, of course. His killing removed a uniformed officer from the chain of events, an officer who may have been acting on instructions that were never fully explained. Interestingly enough, according to Oswald's landlady, an officer believed to be Tippit pulled up outside his rooming house and honked the horn and drove off. Allegedly, Tippit didn't know Oswald. How would he know where he lived? Dallas County Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig was among the first officers who responded to Texas School Book Depository. Craig later stated he saw a man he believed to be Oswald leave the scene in a Nash Rambler station wagon driven by another individual. Observation directly contradicted the official narrative of Oswald acting alone. Craig repeated this account consistently and publicly, and the consequences were swift and severe. He was ostracized within law enforcement circles, denied promotions, eventually forced out of his profession. Reported multiple attempts on his life, including being run off the road and shot at, and his credibility was attacked relentlessly. In 1975, he was found dead from a gunshot wound. And of course, as you might suspect, his death was immediately ruled a suicide. Those who knew him rejected that conclusion. He had remained determined to tell what he believed to be the truth and had expressed fear for his life. His death occurred just as renewed public interest in the assassination beginning to grow. Another law enforcement witness was taken out of the picture. Now, Earlene Roberts managed the rooming house where Oswald lived. Her testimony was crucial because it directly affected Oswald's movements immediately after the assassination. According to Roberts, she told investigators Oswald returned to the rooming house shortly after the shooting, very calm, left quickly. Her account raised serious questions about whether Oswald could have traveled from the 6th floor of the depository to the location of Officer Tippett's murder within the time frame asserted by authorities. Roberts later expressed confusion and concern over how her statements were represented. She indicated that investigators attempted to steer her testimony into alignment with pre-established timelines. In 1966, before she could retestify or clarify her account, she died of a heart attack at the age of 41. Her death eliminated a key witness whose testimony complicated the official reconstruction of events. Dallas police officer Buddy Walters reportedly spoke openly about irregularities in the assassination investigation and expressed concerns that evidence was being mishandled. In 1964, he was shot and killed under circumstances officially described as unrelated to the Kennedy assassination. His death received little national attention. It should have, but it didn't. Not every law enforcement witness died violently. Some were neutralized to institutional pressure. Officer Joe Marshall Smith later claimed he was instructed to falsely identify a suspect resembling Oswald in a police lineup. He said he refused to comply and was subsequently faced threats and harassment. He lived, but his professional life was effectively destroyed. Other officers who questioned evidence handling or witness treatment found themselves reassigned or marginalized or silenced through administrative means. Their concerns rarely made it into official reports. What distinguishes law enforcement witnesses and civilian bystanders is the weight of their testimony. Officers are trained observers. They understand procedures, evidence change, and investigative integrity. When multiple individuals independently reported irregularities and when those officers suffer disproportionately severe consequences, the implications are difficult to ignore. Some died violently. Some died suddenly. Some were silenced without dying at all. Together they form a second ring around the assassination. They were closer to power, closer to evidence, and therefore more dangerous to an official narrative that demanded simplicity and closure. Well, now we're going to turn our attention to another critical group, the employees of the Texas School Book Depository itself. Men and women whose proximity to the alleged crime scene put them in the center of one of the most contested locations in American history. If Dealey Plaza was a stage upon which history turned, the Texas School Book Depository became the focal point of the official explanation. Within hours of the assassination of President Kennedy, investigators centered their case on the 6th floor of the building, which they claim all the shots had been fired. The depository is transformed from a warehouse into an alleged nest of a lone assassin. But the people that worked inside the building that day, men and women with fixed schedules and known locations and no incentive to deceive, didn't always support the story that quickly crystallized around them. Their accounts raised questions that were never fully resolved. Employees of the Texas School Book Depository occupied a unique evidentiary position. Unlike spectators, their movements were documented. Unlike police officers, they weren't part of the investigative hierarchy. Unlike later analysts, they were present inside the building at the critical moment. If a single gunman fired 3 shots from the 6th floor, the behavior, sounds, and movements inside the building should have reflected that reality clearly. They did not. One of the most controversial witnesses was Charles Givens, who worked on the 6th floor early on the day of the assassination. He claimed that shortly before the shooting, he saw Lee Harvey Oswald alone on that floor. And that statement became the foundation of the official case. And yet his testimony evolved over time. Earlier statements differed from later ones. His recollections of timing, location, and interaction shifted subtly but significantly. Critics noted Givens' account appeared increasingly aligned with the needs of the investigation as it progressed. Givens lived with the weight of being one of the few witnesses whose testimony directly placed Oswald in the alleged sniper's nest. His credibility was both relied on and questioned. His statements remained among the most debated of all depository accounts. Another 6th floor employee, Bonnie Ray Williams, offered testimony that complicated the lone gunman theory in unexpected ways. Williams stated at the time of the shooting, he was eating lunch on the 6th floor, described hearing a loud noise and didn't immediately recognize it as a rifle shot. More importantly, he reported he didn't hear multiple shots fired in close succession from nearby. and this absence of expected noise was significant. High-powered rifle discharged 3 times in a confined space should have produced unmistakable acoustic effects, reverberations, echoes, and debris displacement. Williams' testimony didn't confirm those expectations. And interestingly enough, Williams died at a relatively young age, long before renewed public scrutiny of the case brought many unresolved questions back into focus. Maybe the most damaging testimony of the official timeline came from Victoria Adams, a clerical worker who was descending the rear stairwell with co-worker Sandra Stiles immediately after the shots were fired. Adams stated she and Stiles moved quickly down the stairs and didn't encounter Oswald in their descent. That directly contradicted the official claim Oswald left the 6th floor, hid the rifle, and went down the stairs within seconds of the final shot. The timing just did not work. Rather than adjusting the theory to accommodate Adams' testimony, investigators adjusted the testimony itself. Her statements were minimized, reinterpreted, or omitted from final conclusions. The stairwell problem wasn't solved, it was just sidelined. Adams lived, but her account was effectively erased from the core narrative. Now, the overlooked witness was Arnold Rowland. He told authorities he saw a man with a rifle on an upper floor of the depository before the assassination, but not where the official story had later put him. Rowland's description suggested activity inconsistent with the lone gunman model. His testimony received little attention, and like many depository witnesses who recounts complicated matters, he was not emphasized in official summaries. Beyond individual accounts, a broader problem emerged. The internal sensory experience of the depository did not match expectations. Several employees reported confusion rather than certainty. Some didn't hear rifle shots clearly. Others heard noises that didn't align with a nearby firearm discharge. Some employees remained calm, unaware shots had been fired at all. These inconsistencies were not resolved through investigation. Instead, they were absorbed into a narrative that prioritized conclusion over coherence. None of the depository witnesses were charged with wrongdoing beyond Oswald himself, but many found their lives altered by association with the building and the crime. Some just simply withdrew from public discussion. Others grew frustrated by misrepresentation of their words, and a few died before later inquiries might have revisited their testimony. The collective experience reveals a pattern already seen among civilian eyewitnesses and law enforcement officers. Testimony that supported the official story was amplified. Testimony that complicated it was diminished. Texas School Book Depository is presented as the answer. Its witness suggested it was just another question. Well, our attention is now going to turn to the man who ensured the accused assassin never answered the questions in court. Under the expanding circle of death that followed in his wake, I'm talking about the one and only Jack Ruby. But on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We run out of time today. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about Jack Ruby and the elimination of Lee Harvey Oswald. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.